Red warning lights flashed across the control panels as the scout ship's navigation system failed catastrophically. Dean Richards gripped the manual controls, his knuckles white with effort as the small vessel shuddered violently around him. Mayday, mayday! Scout ship Hermes losing altitude over Thornia. Navigation compromised. Attempting emergency landing at coordinates. The transmission cut off as the ship plummeted through the atmosphere, heat building along the hull until it glowed orange hot. The metallic taste of fear filled Dean's mouth as he fought to level the ship. The surface of Thornia rushed toward him, a dark, forbidding landscape of jagged rock formations and massive thorn bushes stretching to the horizon. He pulled back on the controls with all his strength, but it was too late. The ship slammed into the ground, skidding across the rocky terrain, tearing through thickets of black thorns before coming to a shuddering halt. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and Dean's ragged breathing. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but a quick assessment confirmed nothing was broken. The same couldn't be said for his ship. The hull had been breached in several places, and the navigation system was beyond repair. The emergency beacon was functioning, but who knew how long it would take for a rescue team to reach this remote corner of Thornia? Dean checked his environmental suit. The integrity was at 93%, not perfect, but it would have to do. Reports indicated Thornia's atmosphere was technically breathable for humans, but filled with metallic-scented pollen that could cause respiratory problems with prolonged exposure. He grabbed his survival pack and plasma rifle before reluctantly leaving the relative safety of the damaged ship. Outside, the alien landscape stretched in every direction, more hostile than any briefing could have prepared him for. Giant thorn bushes, some reaching 30 feet high, formed a labyrinth of black, glistening spikes. The ground was littered with sharp rocks and smaller, equally dangerous plants. The air had a coppery tang, and particulates floated like snowflakes in the dim light of Thornia's distant sun. Dean activated his wrist scanner, searching for any signs of water or shelter. The reading showed a small freshwater source a kilometer east, but before he could set off in that direction, instinct made him freeze. Something was watching him. He turned slowly, plasma rifle raised, scanning the dense thorny vegetation. At first, he saw nothing, then movement caught his eye. A shadow detached itself from the thorn bush with liquid grace, resolving into a humanoid figure that made Dean's breath catch. She was clearly female, but unlike any woman Dean had ever seen. Her body was lithe and powerful, covered in short, tawny fur with darker markings. Her face was feline-like, with high cheekbones, a slightly flattened nose, and large, luminous eyes that fixed on him with predatory intensity. Her ears, pointed and alert, swiveled to catch every sound, and behind her, a long tail lashed back and forth. In her hands, she held a crude but effective-looking spear fashioned from bone. "Who are you?" she growled, her voice low and threatening. "Why have you come to Thornfields?" Dean raised his hands slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "My name is Dean Richards. I'm a scout for the Galactic Exploration Corps. My ship malfunctioned. I crashed. I'm not here to cause any trouble." The Beastwoman's nostrils flared, and she took a step closer, spear still poised to strike. "Your kind always brings trouble. Hunters, slavers, thieves. I'm none of those things," Dean insisted. "I'm just trying to survive until my people can find me." She circled him warily, keeping her distance but studying him with those unsettling amber eyes. "Your people won't find you quickly enough. The Thornfields kill outsiders." "Then I could use some help," Dean said honestly. "I've got technology, supplies. We could help each other." The Beastwoman snorted, a surprisingly human sound of derision. "And why would I help you, human?" "Because two survivors have better odds than one," Dean replied evenly. "And because I'm offering an alliance, not begging for charity." For a long moment, she stared at him, seemingly weighing her options. Finally, she lowered her spear slightly, not enough to be defenseless, but enough to signal she wasn't about to attack. "Asteria," she said abruptly. "That is what you may call me, and I will guide you for now. But if you betray me..." Her teeth flashed, sharp and white against her fur. Understand, Dean nodded, slowly lowering his hands. Thank you. Asteria approached cautiously, and Dean couldn't help but stare at her unusual appearance. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. If you keep looking, I'll pounce. Now hurry and get the thorn out of your boot before it poisons you, she snapped, pointing to where a black thorn had pierced the material of his boot. Dean looked down, surprised to see the needle-like object embedded in his footwear. He quickly removed it, noting the purplish liquid at its tip. The small ones are the most dangerous, Asteria explained tersely. They release toxins that paralyze slowly. You would have been dead by nightfall. With that cheerful observation, she turned and began moving through the thorn bushes with remarkable agility. Keep up, human. We need shelter before dark. The hunters come out then. Dean hurried after her, wondering what kind of hunter she meant, and whether he'd made a deal with the devil or found his only chance of survival on this hostile world. Asteria moved through the thorn bushes as if they were harmless saplings rather than deadly obstacles. Her movements were fluid and precise, never touching the poisonous barbs that surrounded them. Dean struggled to follow her, wincing as his environmental suit snagged repeatedly on the thorns. Step where I step, Asteria instructed, her voice low but carrying easily to his ears. The thorn fields sense hesitation. They hunger for it. The plants can sense emotions. Dean asked skeptically. Asteria shot him a look over her shoulder. Everything on Thornia hunts, even the plants. As if to prove her point, a nearby bush shivered slightly, its thorns seeming to orient toward them like sensors. Dean swallowed hard and focused on following Asteria's exact path. They moved deeper into the labyrinth of thorns, the light dimming as the massive plants towered overhead, creating a canopy of deadly spikes. Occasionally, strange calls echoed through the wilderness, screeching, howling sounds that made the hair on the back of Dean's neck stand up. What kind of animals make those noises? He asked, keeping his voice quiet. Thorn beasts, Asteria replied. Predators. They hunt in packs at night. We must find shelter before they begin a prowl. As they continued, Dean noticed Asteria collecting small berries and leaves from certain plants, carefully avoiding others. Her knowledge of this hostile environment was impressive, and he found himself studying her movements, trying to learn. She moved with a primal grace, powerful muscles shifting beneath her fur, every sense alert to dangers he couldn't even perceive. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. We can shelter there for the night. The outcropping formed a small cave, its entrance partially blocked by thorn bushes. Asteria carefully pushed them aside, revealing a space just large enough for two people to squeeze through. Inside, the cave widened, offering enough room to stand and move around. I use this place sometimes, Asteria explained, gesturing to a small pile of dried vegetation in one corner. It's defensible. Dean set down his pack and surveyed their shelter. Thank you for bringing me here. I wouldn't have survived long on my own. Asteria's ear twitched, and she turned away, busy with arranging the dried plants into what appeared to be bedding. You still might not survive. The thorn fields are unforgiving. I've been in tough situations before, Dean said, opening his survival pack. Military training. 5 years on the front lines during the Centauri conflict. War, Asteria scoffed. Humans always fighting humans. On Thornia, we fight to survive, not for territory or power. Is that why you're alone? Dean asked cautiously. Are there others like you? A shadow passed over Asteria's features. There were. My clan lived in the southern valleys, away from the densest thorn fields. We hunted, gathered, traded sometimes with other clans. Her voice hardened. Then the slavers came. They killed many, took others. I escaped into the thorn fields where they feared to follow. I'm sorry, Dean said, genuine sympathy in his voice. How long ago? 3 cycles of the third moon, she replied, which Dean mentally translated to roughly a year and a half. I've been alone since. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden, bone-chilling howl from somewhere in the distance. Asteria's ears pricked forward, and her body tensed. Thorn lion, she whispered. Too close. Dean reached for his plasma rifle, checking the charge. Dangerous? Deadly, she confirmed. Apex predator. They hunt at night. As darkness fell, the sounds outside grew more numerous and closer. Dean activated a small light from his pack, casting the cave in a soft glow. Asteria crouched by the entrance, her spear ready, listening intently to the night sounds. We should take shifts, Dean suggested. I'll watch first while you rest. Asteria looked at him suspiciously. Why would you let me sleep when I could kill you in the morning? Because we made a deal, Dean replied simply. And because neither of us survives alone out here. Asteria studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Wake me at moonrise. And don't leave the cave, no matter what you hear. She curled up on her bed adried. Vegetation, her back to the wall, spear still within reach. Dean settled near the entrance, rifle across his knees, listening to the alien night sounds of Thornia. Survival was his primary goal, but as he glanced at his mysterious companion, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets this world, and Asteria, held. Morning brought a temporary respite from the dangers of Thornia. Dean awoke to find Asteria already alert, sharpening her bone spear with a piece of flint. She acknowledged him with a nod, then tossed him several small, purple fruits. Eat, she instructed. They're safe for humans. We have a long journey ahead. Dean examined the fruit cautiously before taking a bite. It had a tart, almost metallic taste, but was surprisingly refreshing. Where are we going? To higher ground, Asteria replied. Your ship is damaged beyond repair. If you want to signal your people, we need to reach the plateau. She gestured vaguely eastward. The thorns are less dense there. Better visibility. They emerged from the cave into the pale morning light. The thornfields looked different by day, no less dangerous, but somehow less ominous. The giant thorn bushes glistened with dew, and strange, bell-shaped flowers had opened among the thorns, releasing clouds of pollen that drifted on the breeze. Don't breathe deeply when the flowers bloom, Asteria warned. The pollen dulls the senses. They set off, Asteria leading the way through the labyrinth with unerring confidence. Dean was struck by how perfectly adapted she was to this hostile environment. Her movements economical, her senses hyper-aware of every danger. In comparison, he felt clumsy and vulnerable, despite his military training. Were you born here? He asked as they navigated a particularly dense patch of thorn bushes. Yes, Asteria replied shortly. Then after a pause, added, My people have lived on Thornia for generations. We evolved alongside the thorns. Your people? Are you related to Earth felines? You look. Dean hesitated, not wanting to offend. We are not your pets, Asteria said sharply. My ancestors came from a world called Feligia. It was destroyed by solar flares. They fled here. That was many generations ago. Before Dean could ask more questions, Asteria suddenly froze, raising one hand for silence. Her ears swiveled forward and her nostrils flared. What is it? Dean whispered, bringing his rifle up. Thorn beast, she replied quietly. Close. No sooner had she spoken than a massive creature burst from the thorn bushes ahead. It resembled a giant wildcat, but its body was covered in bony plates and small thorns. Its 6 legs ended in razor-sharp claws, and its mouth was filled with needle-like teeth. The beast snarled, focusing on Dean as the unfamiliar prey. It charged with unexpected speed, leaping toward him with claws extended. Dean fired his plasma rifle, the energy bolt catching the creature in the shoulder. It screamed in pain, but didn't slow. Aim for the underbelly, Asteria shouted, already moving to flank the beast. The armor is thinner there. Dean rolled to avoid the beast's charge, coming up in a firing position. The thorn beast wheeled around, preparing for another attack. As it lunged, Asteria darted in from the side, driving her bone spear into its exposed flank. The beast roared and twisted, knocking her aside with a powerful swipe of its tail. Dean seized the opportunity, firing 2 rapid plasma bolts into the creature's underbelly. The thorn beast convulsed, dark blood streaming from its wounds, then collapsed onto the rocky ground. Dean rushed to Asteria, who was already picking herself up. Are you hurt? Scratches, she dismissed, though Dean could see blood matting the fur on her arm. You fight well, for a human. You too, for anyone, Dean replied with a hint of a smile. We make a good team. Asteria's expression remained serious, but something in her eyes softened slightly. The beast's attack will attract others. We should move quickly. As they continued their journey, Dean noticed Asteria occasionally glancing at him with what seemed like reassessment. Their encounter with the Thorn beast had shifted something between them, a fragile trust beginning to form. By midday, they reached the edge of a vast gorge that cut through the landscape like a wound. Far below, a river of dark water flowed sluggishly among more thorny vegetation. We must cross here, Asteria said, pointing to a natural stone bridge spanning the narrowest section of the gorge. The plateau lies beyond. The bridge was narrow and without railings, a simple span of rock perhaps 20 feet across. Below it, the gorge plunged hundreds of feet to the river. Is this the only way? Dean asked, eyeing the precarious crossing. The only way that doesn't take us through Thorn Beast territory, Asteria confirmed. I'll go first. She crossed with nimble grace, her tail acting as a counterbalance as she navigated the narrow path. Dean followed more cautiously, keeping his eyes fixed on the opposite side rather than looking down. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind made him sway dangerously. Asteria, already on the other side, extended her hand in a surprisingly human gesture. Don't look down, she called. Focus on my hand. Dean reached out, clasping her hand firmly as he made the final steps across. Her grip was strong, her palm covered in a fine layer of fur that felt oddly soft against his skin. Thanks, he said as he reached safety. For a moment, they stood there, hands still joined, before Asteria abruptly pulled away. We should keep moving, she said, turning to lead the way up the rocky slope beyond the gorge. The plateau is still far. As they climbed higher, the density of thorn bushes decreased, replaced by scraggly vegetation and bare rock. The air grew cooler and clearer, with less of the metallic-scented pollen that permeated the lower regions. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky ledge that offered a panoramic view of the thornfield below. From this vantage point, Dean could see the vast extent of the thorny labyrinth, stretching to the horizon in undulating waves of black vegetation. In the distance, a thin plume of smoke rose from what might have been his crashed ship. We'll make camp here, Asteria announced, gesturing to a sheltered hollow in the rock face. Tomorrow we climb to the plateau. As they prepared their simple camp, Dean noticed Asteria wincing slightly as she moved her injured arm. Let me see that, he offered, opening his med kit. I have antiseptic and bandages. Asteria hesitated, then reluctantly extended her arm. The thorn beast's claws had left 3 deep gashes across her forearm, the fur around them matted with dried blood. Dean cleaned the wounds carefully, applying antiseptic gel from his supplies. Asteria watched him work, her expression unreadable. Your people have good medicine, she observed. It's standard issue, Dean replied, wrapping a bandage around her arm. Every scout carries basic medical supplies. And weapons, she added, glancing at his plasma rifle. For defense, Dean clarified. The Galactic Exploration Corps isn't military, despite what you might think. We're explorers, cartographers, scientists. We document new worlds, establish contact with indigenous species, look for resources. Resources, Asteria repeated, a hint of bitterness in her voice. That's how it starts. Then come the miners, the colonists, the hunters. Dean finished bandaging her arm and sat back. Not always. There are strict protocols now. Indigenous rights are protected. Pretty words, Asteria said dismissively. But out here, far from your laws, who enforces these protocols? People like me, Dean answered honestly. It's part of our job, to protect as well as explore. Asteria studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine his sincerity. Finally, she nodded slightly. Rest, she said, moving to take the first watch. I'll wake you when it's your turn. As darkness fell, Dean wrapped himself in his thermal blanket and watched Asteria's silhouette against the starlit sky. She sat perfectly still, her keen senses alert to any threat. Despite her skepticism and initial hostility, she had saved his life multiple times already. He wondered what other qualities lay beneath her fierce exterior. With these thoughts drifting through his mind, Dean fell into a light sleep, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of Thornia's night. The plateau stretched before them, a vast expanse of relatively flat terrain dotted with smaller thorn bushes and strange, dome-shaped rock formations. The higher elevation offered clearer air and better visibility, but also less shelter from the elements. "This is good," Dean observed, checking his scanner. "Less interference up here. If I can boost my emergency beacon, there's a better chance someone will pick up the signal." Asteria nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We should seek shelter first. The sun is strong here, and there are still predators." They trekked across the plateau, heading toward a cluster of the dome-shaped rocks. As they approached, Dean noticed something strange about the formation. "These aren't natural," he said, examining the curved surface of the nearest dome. "They're too uniform." Asteria's expression darkened. "They're not. This was once a settlement, a trading post between my people and the southern clans. Before the slavers came." Dean ran his hand over the stone, recognizing the subtle signs of construction. "I am sorry. Were you here when it happened?" "No," Asteria replied, leading him toward the largest dome. "But I've heard the stories. The slavers came in the night, with sonic weapons that disrupted our senses. Many were taken." Her voice hardened. "Many more were killed when they resisted." The interior of the dome was cool and dark, with the remnants of what had once been living quarters still visible. Sleeping platforms carved into the walls, storage niches, a central fire pit. Dust and debris covered everything, but the structure was intact. "This will do," Dean said, setting down his pack. "I can work on the beacon here." While Dean unpacked his equipment, Asteria explored the abandoned dwelling, occasionally picking up small objects, a carved bone comb, a fragment of woven material, and examining them with a distant expression. "Were these your people?" Dean asked gently. Asteria shook her head. "Different clan, but all Felshans are connected." She replaced the items carefully, as if paying respect to the departed. Dean worked on modifying his emergency beacon, jury-rigging components from his other equipment to boost the signal strength. Asteria watched him curiously, occasionally asking questions about how the technology worked. "Your people have advanced far," she observed. "In some ways," Dean agreed. "Technology, space travel, medicine. But we still have our problems. Was, inégalité, exploitation. Like all sentient species," Asteria mused. "Always striving, never satisfied." As Dean continued working, Asteria suddenly tensed, her ears swiveling toward the entrance. In one fluid movement, she was on her feet, spear in hand. "What is it?" Dean whispered, reaching for his rifle. "Someone's coming," she replied, her voice low. Many footsteps, not Felshans. Dean joined her at the entrance, peering cautiously outside. In the distance, a group of humanoid figures was crossing the plateau, heading in their direction. They wore environmental suits and carried weapons. Not standard Galactic Corps issue, but the heavier, more lethal equipment favored by mercenaries and hunters. "Slavers," Asteria hissed, her fur bristling. "They followed our trail." Dean counted at least 8 figures, all heavily armed. "We're outnumbered. We need to move." "No," Asteria growled. "There's no time. They've already spotted the domes. We must hide and hope they pass by." They retreated deeper into the dome, finding a small storage chamber partially concealed by a fallen section of wall. Crouching in the shadows, they waited as the footsteps grew closer. Rough voices echoed through the abandoned settlement, speaking a dialect Dean didn't recognize. Asteria's eyes narrowed as she listened, her claws extending unconsciously. "They're searching for us," she whispered. "They saw your ship crash. They think you're valuable. A Galactic Corps officer would fetch a high price in certain markets." "And you?" Dean asked quietly. Asteria's expression was grim. "Felshans are rare now. Exotic. We're prized for our reflexes, our senses. as slaves or trophies. Her voice dropped even lower. Or worse. The footsteps came closer, entering their dome. Flashlights swept across the dusty interior, passing dangerously close to their hiding place. Dean held his breath, feeling Asteria's tension beside him. A voice called out something in the unfamiliar language, and the footsteps receded. For a moment, they thought the danger had passed. Then a small metallic object rolled into their hiding place, emitting a high-pitched whine. Sonic probe. Asteria gasped, clutching her sensitive ears in pain. Their cover blown, Dean grabbed his rifle and fired at the falling wall section, causing it to collapse completely and block the entrance to their hiding place. The temporary barrier wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy them precious seconds. There's another way out, Asteria said through gritted teeth, pointing to a narrow shaft in the back wall. Ventilation system. It connects to the other domes. They squeezed into the tight passage, crawling as quickly as possible while shouts and weapons fire erupted behind them. The shaft opened into another dome. This one partially collapsed. Without hesitation, they dashed across the open space and out into the plateau. Run, Asteria commanded, heading for a rocky outcropping that offered some cover. They sprinted across the exposed terrain, plasma bolts sizzling through the air around them. Dean fired back occasionally, more to slow their pursuers than with any hope of hitting them at this distance. Reaching the rocks, they paused to catch their breath. Dean checked his beacon, which had been damaged in their escape. The transmitter's shot, he said grimly. We need another plan. Asteria peered cautiously over the rocks. They're spreading out to surround us. We can't stay here. Dean surveyed their options, which were rapidly dwindling. Then he noticed something in the distance. A glint of metal among the rocks at the far edge of the plateau. Look there, he said, pointing. That might be a crashed ship. If it is, it could have a working transmitter, or even better, a shuttle. Asteria followed his gaze, her keen eyes narrowing. It's far, and we'd be exposed for much of the journey. Got any better ideas? Dean asked with a grim smile. Asteria bared her teeth in what might have been a smile or a grimace. No, let's go. They slipped away from the rocks, using the sparse vegetation and uneven terrain for cover as they made their way toward the distant wreckage. Behind them, the slavers continued their systematic search, unaware for now that their quarry had fled. The journey across the plateau was nerve-wracking. Every step in the open felt like an invitation for discovery, yet they had no choice but to continue. Dean's environmental suit was showing signs of wear, torn in several places from thorns and their desperate escape. Asteria moved with characteristic grace, but he could see that her injured arm was troubling her. How long have these slavers been operating on Thornia? Dean asked as they paused behind a small thorn thicket to catch their breath. Years, Asteria replied, her voice bitter. They started with small raids on isolated clans, then grew bolder. My people tried to unite against them, but she shook her head. We were too scattered, too used to independence. And no one from off-world has intervened? Dean frowned. Slave trading is illegal in galactic territories. Thornia is far from the center, Asteria pointed out. And officially, it's uninhabited. No indigenous sentient species registered. She gave Dean a pointed look. Your Corps surveys missed us, or chose to ignore us. Dean had no answer for that. It was true that remote worlds often fell through the cracks of galactic protection. It was one of the reasons he joined the Scout Corps, to help bridge those gaps, to be the eyes and ears where others didn't look. As they continued their journey, the distant wreckage grew larger, revealing itself to be not a small shuttle, but a substantial spacecraft, a freighter or small transport vessel, partially buried in the rocky soil. That's not a recent crash, Dean observed. It's been here for years. Yes, Asteria confirmed. It fell during the time of fire, when I was still a cub. Some say it was shot down by the slavers when they first came. Others believe it was trying to help my people escape. They approached the wreckage cautiously. The ship had crashed nose first, its tail section pointing skyward. The hull was battered and corroded, but largely intact. Massive thorn vines had grown around and into it, as if the planet itself was trying to reclaim the foreign object. If the power core is still intact, there might be systems we can use, Dean said, examining the external damage. The question is how to get inside. Asteria pointed to a rupture in the hull near the ground. There, we can squeeze through. The interior of the crashed ship was dim and eerily silent. Emergency lighting, powered by some still-functioning backup system, cast a faint red glow over corridors tilted at odd angles. The air was stale but breathable. The bridge would be forward, Dean said, orienting himself. Engineering aft. Either might have communications equipment we can use. They made their way carefully through the silent ship, climbing over debris and forcing open jam doors. Dean was impressed by Asteria's adaptability. Despite never having been inside a spacecraft before, she navigated the alien environment with cautious confidence. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly as they worked their way down a corridor. "If we manage to contact your people?" Dean paused, realizing he hadn't thought that far ahead. "Return to report, I suppose. My mission was to survey Thornia, and I've certainly learned more than expected. And what of the slavers? Of what has happened to my people?" Asteria's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Will you tell your core about that too?" "Of course," Dean said firmly. "That's exactly the kind of information I'm supposed to report. Illegal activities, endangered populations. And what will your core do?" Asteria interrupted. "Send strongly worded messages? Economic sanctions." Dean met her gaze steadily. "They'll send help. Peacekeepers, if necessary. Your people have rights, Asteria. The slavers are breaking galactic law." Asteria studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps I misjudged your kind. Some of us, at least," Dean smiled slightly. "We're not all bad." They continued forward, eventually reaching the bridge, a shambles of broken equipment and collapsed ceiling panels. Dean surveyed the damage with growing disappointment. "The main systems are destroyed," he said after examining the control panels. "No chance of communications from here." "Engineering, then?" Asteria suggested. Dean nodded, and they retraced their steps, heading toward the rear of the ship. As they passed through the central section, Dean noticed scratch markings on one of the walls, symbols of some kind. "What are these?" he asked, running his fingers over the marks. Asteria examined them, her expression grave. "Names. Felsian names. Those who were taken when this ship was captured." Dean felt a chill. This was a slave ship. "Yes," Asteria confirmed. "It crashed during transport. Some of my people may have escaped. Others would have died in the crash." The realization gave their mission a new urgency. This wasn't just about Dean's survival anymore. It was about justice for Asteria's people, about exposing a crime that had gone unpunished for too long. They continued to engineering, finding it in better condition than the bridge. The backup power systems were still functioning at minimal capacity, enough to power basic systems. Dean examined the equipment, looking for anything that could be adapted into a long-range communicator. "Here," he said finally, pointing to an emergency transmitter. "This is designed to operate on minimal power. If I can recalibrate it to galactic core frequencies, we might be able to send a distress call." While Dean worked on the transmitter, Asteria kept watch, her senses alert for any sign of the slavers. The ship creaked and groaned around them, the sounds of metal expanding and contracting in the temperature changes of Thornia's day. "How long will this take?" Asteria asked, peering anxiously at the complex machinery Dean was manipulating. "Not sure," he admitted. "Hours, maybe. It's delicate work. We may not have hours," Asteria warned. "The slavers know this plateau. They'll check the wreck eventually." As if summoned by her words, a distant sound reached them. Footsteps on metal, somewhere above. Asteria's ears swiveled toward the noise, and she tensed. "They're here," she whispered. Inside the ship. Dean worked faster, connecting wires and reprogramming the transmitter. "I need more time." Asteria made a quick decision. "Keep working. I'll lead them away." Before Dean could protest, she slipped out of engineering, silent as a shadow. He wanted to call her back, to tell her it was too dangerous, but he knew she was right. Someone had to buy time, and she was better equipped to evade the slavers in the confined space of the ship. Alone in the dimly lit engineering section, Dean redoubled his efforts, racing against time to complete the makeshift communicator. Occasionally, he heard distant sounds of pursuit, shouts, running footsteps, once a weapon discharge that made his heart skip a beat. He prayed Asteria was safe, using her knowledge and agility to stay ahead of the hunters. Finally, the transmitter hummed to life. Dean quickly set it to the emergency galactic core frequency and began broadcasting. Mayday, Mayday. This is Scout Dean Richards of the Galactic Exploration Corps. Crashed on Thornia, under attack by illegal slavers. Indigenous sentient population in danger. Request immediate assistance. Coordinates follow. He set the message to repeat continuously, hoping it would reach anyone who could help. Now he needed to find Asteria and escape the ship before the slavers discovered the transmitter. Dean armed himself with his plasma rifle and cautiously ventured out of engineering. The ship had become a battleground, evidence of the hunt visible in scorch marks on the walls and scattered equipment. He followed the signs of conflict, moving stealthily through the corridors. A shout echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by a crash. Dean quickened his pace, turning a corner to find Asteria cornered by 3 slavers. She had positioned herself in a defensible spot, her spear keeping her attackers at bay, but she was trapped with nowhere to retreat. Without hesitation, Dean fired his plasma rifle, striking one of the slavers in the shoulder. The man howled in pain and dropped to the ground. The other 2 whirled to face this new threat, giving Asteria the opening she needed. She lunged forward, driving her bone spear into the leg of the nearest attacker, then spun to kick the 3rd man back against the wall. This way, Dean shouted, firing again to provide cover as Asteria sprinted toward him. Together they ran through the tilted corridors of the ruined ship, the sounds of pursuit growing behind them. Asteria moved with incredible speed despite her injury, leading Dean through a maze of maintenance tunnels and collapsed passages. The transmitter? She asked between breaths. Active, Dean confirmed, sending a distress call on loop. But we need to get out of here. They'll discover it soon enough. They found an emergency exit, a small airlock designed for repairs, and squeezed through, emerging on the ship's outer hull. From this elevated position, they could see the plateau stretching around them, and in the distance, more slavers approaching the wreck. We're surrounded, Dean realized grimly. Asteria surveyed their options, her eyes narrowing as she formulated a plan. There, she pointed to a narrow ravine cutting through the edge of the plateau. If we can reach it, we can descend to the Thorn fields. They won't follow us there, not at night. And us? Dean asked. Asteria's lips curved in what might have been a smile. I know the Thorns. You follow. Me. They climbed down from the ship's hull, using the thorn vines for handholds despite the risk of poison. Once on the ground, they made a dash for the ravine, keeping the bulk of the crashed ship between them and most of the slavers. Still, they were spotted, and plasma bolts sizzled past them as they ran. The ravine provided temporary shelter, a steep-sided gully cutting down from the plateau toward the thorn fields below. They half climbed, half slid down its rocky surface, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. They won't give up easily, Asteria warned as they paused to catch their breath. Not with a Galactic Corps officer and a Felsion as prizes. Then we need to make sure they can't find us, Dean replied, checking his rifle's charge, barely half remaining. How far to a defensive position? Asteria considered. There's a cave system at the base of the ravine, connected to underground water. We could hold there until help arrives. If help arrives, Dean amended realistically. My message might not have been received. Then we fight, Asteria said simply. As we've been doing, they continued down the ravine, which grew steeper and narrower as they descended. The walls closed in around them, forcing them to climb over fallen boulders and squeeze through tight passages. Behind them, they could hear the slavers following, calling to each other as they tracked their prey. As they neared the bottom of the ravine, the terrain changed. The thornfields began encroaching, massive bushes blocking parts of their path, forcing detours. Asteria navigated with confidence, selecting routes that looked impassable to Dean's eyes, but somehow yielded to her expert guidance. Darkness was falling rapidly, the alien sun dipping below the horizon in a blaze of purple and red. The temperature dropped, and strange bioluminescent patches appeared on some of the thorn bushes, casting an eerie blue glow over the landscape. "The cave is ahead," Asterius said, pointing to a dark opening partially concealed by thorny vegetation. "But we must be careful. Night creatures will be emerging." As if summoned by her words, a chilling howl echoed through the gathering darkness. Then another, and another, forming a chorus of predatory calls. Thorn lions. Dean recognized the sound from their first night. A pack. Asteria nodded grimly. "They hunt at twilight, and they're between us and the cave." They crept forward cautiously, using the thorn bushes for cover. In the dim light, Dean could make out dark shapes moving in the distance. Large predators with glowing eyes, stalking through the vegetation with deadly purpose. "They haven't scented us yet," Asteria whispered. "The wind is in our favor." They continued their careful approach, freezing whenever one of the thorn lions looked in their direction. The cave entrance was tantalizingly close, perhaps 50 meters away, when disaster struck. A loose stone under Dean's foot gave way, clattering down the slope. The sound, slight as it was, caught the attention of the nearest thorn lion. Its head swiveled toward them, eyes gleaming in the darkness. The creature gave a bone-chilling snarl, alerting the rest of its pack. Suddenly, multiple pairs of glowing eyes turned in their direction. "Run!" Asteria shouted, abandoning stealth. For the cave. They sprinted across the open ground, the thorn lions converging on them with frightening speed. Dean fired his plasma rifle at the closest beast, the energy bolt searing through its shoulder but barely slowing it down. Asteria ran with preternatural speed, but stayed close to Dean, unwilling to leave him behind. The lead thorn lion lunged, missing Dean by inches as he dove to the side. Asteria's spear flashed, stabbing into the creature's flank, drawing a howl of pain and rage. They scrambled forward, the cave entrance now just meters away. A second thorn lion cut them off, forcing them to change direction. Dean fired again, the blast catching the beast full in the chest, knocking it backward. His rifle beeped in warning, power critically low. "Almost there," Asteria called, grabbing Dean's arm to pull him along. They made a final desperate sprint for the cave entrance, thorn lions closing in from all sides. They dove through the narrow opening just as the largest predator pounced, its claws scraping against the rock as they tumbled into the relative safety of the cave. Inside, the passage was narrow, too small for the massive thorn lions to follow. The beasts snarled and clawed at the entrance, frustrated by the escape of their prey. In the darkness of the cave, Dean and Asteria caught their breath, the adrenaline of their close escape still coursing through their veins. "That was too close," Dean gasped, activating a small light from his wrist device. Asteria nodded, her chest heaving. "The slavers will have heard the thorn lions. They'll know we came this way. But they'll have the same problem with the predators," Dean pointed out. "They can't approach the cave without dealing with the pack." "True," Asteria conceded. "It gives us time." She examined the cave around them. "We should go deeper. There are chambers where we can defend if they follow." They moved through the narrow passage, which gradually widened into a larger cavern. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming small pools on the rocky floor. The air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the heat of the plateau above. "Does this connect to other caves?" Dean asked, examining their surroundings. "Yes," Asteria confirmed. "A whole system. Some lead back to the surface, far from here, if we need to escape. But first we wait," Dean decided. "My transmitter is still sending. If anyone is going to respond, they'll need time to get here." They settled in a defensible corner of the cavern, where they could see the passage they had entered through. Dean checked his equipment. The plasma rifle was nearly depleted, and his environmental suit was damaged in multiple places. He'd lost most of his supplies in their flight from the slavers. "Here," Asteria said, offering him several small, glowing fungi she'd plucked from the cave wall. These are safe to eat. They'll help restore strength. Dean accepted gratefully, finding the fungi had a pleasant, nutty flavor despite their alien appearance. As they shared this modest meal, a companionable silence fell between them, the quiet of two people who had faced death together and formed a bond beyond words. Finally, Dean broke the silence. "Thank you for all of this, for saving my life multiple times." Asteria tilted her head, regarding him with those luminous eyes. "You saved mine as well. We are, what is your term? Even partners," Dean suggested instead. "We're partners now." Something shifted in Asteria's expression, a softening, a hint of vulnerability beneath her fierce exterior. "Partners," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I suppose we are. What will you do?" Dean asked after a moment. "If my people come, if we drive the slavers away." Asteria gazed into the darkness of the cave, considering. "I don't know. For so long, survival has been my only goal. To live another day, to avoid capture." She looked back at Dean. "What else is there?" "Rebuilding," Dean said. "Finding other survivors of your people. Creating something new." "And you?" she challenged. "Will you return to your core, file your report, and move on to the next world?" The question caught Dean off guard. In truth, he hadn't thought beyond survival and completing his mission. But now, faced with Asteria's direct inquiry, he realized something had changed. Thornia, despite its dangers, or perhaps because of them, had affected him deeply. And Asteria? "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "My duty is to report back." But after that, he met her gaze. "I might request a longer assignment here, to help establish relations with the Felshans, to make sure the slavers are truly gone." A hint of a smile touched Asteria's lips. "A diplomatic role? I'm not sure you've seen my people at their most diplomatic." "I've seen you," Dean pointed out. "You started by nearly killing me, and now look at us." Asteria actually laughed, a surprisingly melodious sound that echoed in the cavern. "True. Perhaps there's hope for interspecies relations after all." Their moment of levity was interrupted by distant sounds from the cave entrance. Voices, footsteps. The slavers had dealt with the Thorn lion somehow and were now entering the cave system. "They're coming," Asteria whispered, immediately alert. "We need to prepare." They quickly assessed their position. The cavern had only two exits, the passage they'd entered through and another, smaller tunnel leading deeper into the cave system. The latter could be their escape route if needed, but first, they would make a stand. "We need to slow them down," Dean said, examining the cavern. "Create choke points, traps if possible." Working together, they quickly constructed rudimentary defenses. Loose rocks positioned to create barriers, tripwires made from Asteria's woven plant fibers, natural features of the cave that could provide cover or advantage. The sounds grew closer. Flashlight beams danced on the walls of the connecting passage. Dean took position behind a rock formation, his plasma rifle aimed at the entrance. Asteria concealed herself in shadows, her spear ready, prepared for close combat when Dean's rifle inevitably ran out of charge. "Ready," Dean whispered. Asteria nodded, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. Together, the first slaver appeared in the passage, weapon raised cautiously. Dean waited until he was fully visible, then fired. The plasma bolt caught the man squarely in the chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Immediately, return fire peppered their position, energy bolts sizzling against the rocks. "There are at least 5 more," Asteria hissed, counting there. Opponents by sound and scent. Dean's rifle beeped again, 1 shot remaining. He saved it, waiting for a critical moment. The slavers advanced more cautiously now, using the passage walls for cover. One triggered one of their tripwires, causing a cascade of rocks that temporarily blocked part of the entrance. Cursing and shouts echoed from the passage. "They'll flank us soon," Dean warned. Through that side tunnel, as predicted, 2 slavers appeared from an unexpected direction, a small crevice in the wall that they hadn't noticed. Asteria reacted instantly, hurling a sharpened stone that struck one attacker in the throat. The other fired wildly, forcing Dean and Asteria to duck behind cover. The fighting became chaotic a desperate struggle in the confined space of the cavern. Dean used his final plasma shot to take down another slaver, then switched to hand-to-hand combat, using his military training to compensate for the loss of his ranged weapon. Asteria was magnificent in battle, fluid, lethal, her movements a blur as she engaged multiple opponents simultaneously. Her spear claimed another victim before it was shot from her hands, forcing her to fight with claws and improvised weapons. Despite their skill and determination, they were gradually forced back toward the rear passage. One slaver managed to flank them, his energy weapon trained on Dean. Asteria saw the danger and threw herself at the attacker, taking a glancing hit from the weapon that scorched her side. She howled in pain, but managed to disable her opponent with a vicious strike to the throat. Asteria! Dean rushed to her, seeing the burn on her side. "How bad?" "I'll live," she growled through gritted teeth. "But we need to move." Supporting each other, they retreated into the rear passage, pursued by the remaining slavers. The tunnel narrowed dramatically, forcing them to move single file and slowing their progress. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers calling for reinforcements. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper into the planet. Dean's light revealed strange formations, crystal growths on the walls, underground pools of luminescent water, evidence of an alien ecosystem that had evolved in darkness. "Do you know where this leads?" Dean asked as they paused to rest, Asteria clearly struggling with her injury. "Not exactly," she admitted. "The caves extend for miles, but eventually they must surface." They continued their desperate journey, the sounds of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly close. Asteria's wound slowed them, though she refused to show weakness or accept more than minimal assistance from Dean. Hours seemed to pass in the labyrinthine tunnels. Dean's chronometer confirmed they'd been underground for nearly 5 hours when they noticed a change, a faint breeze, carrying the metallic scent of Thornia's air. "We're near an exit," Asteria observed, her nose twitching. "But it's not the thorn fields I smell. Something different." The passage began to ascend, growing wider. Ahead, they could see a faint glow, not daylight, but something else. They emerged cautiously into an enormous cavern, and the sight took Dean's breath away. The vast underground space was illuminated by massive clusters of bioluminescent fungi, bathing everything in soft blue and green light. An underground river flowed through the center, its water crystal clear. And there, on a rocky island in the middle of the river, stood what could only be described as a sanctuary, crude but recognizable dwellings built from stone and salvaged materials. "What is this place?" Dean whispered in awe. Asteria stared, equally stunned. "I don't know. I've never been here. Never heard of it." As they watched, figures emerged from the dwellings, Felshins like Asteria, but of various ages. Some were obviously wounded or scarred. Elders and cubs moved among them, a hidden community. Survivors, Asteria breathed, understanding dawning. Those who escaped the slavers. They've been hiding here all along. One of the Felshins spotted them and raised an alarm. Immediately, several warriors took defensive positions, weapons raised. Dean and Asteria raised their hands to show they weren't threats. "I am Asteria of the Eastern Ridge clan," Asteria called out in what must have been the Felshin language. Dean couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. There was a moment of tense silence. Then one of the elder Felshins approached the edge of the river, studying them intently. He spoke, and Asteria responded, a rapid exchange that Dean couldn't follow. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. "They're suspicious," Asteria explained. "They've been hiding from the slavers for years. They want to know why we're here and who you are." "Tell them the truth," Dean suggested. "All of it." Asteria nodded and spoke again at length, presumably explaining their situation. The elder listened, occasionally asking questions. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. "They will help us," Asteria told Dean. "They have been watching the slavers for years, gathering information, waiting for a chance to strike back. Your distress call may have brought that chance at last." The Felshins lowered a crude bridge across the river, allowing them to cross to the island sanctuary. Dean was amazed by what they had built, an entire community hidden from both the slavers and the dangers of Thornia's surface. There were gardens of cave fungi, captured thorn beasts domesticated for food and materials, systems for collecting and purifying water. A healer immediately attended to Asteria's wound, applying poultices made from underground plants. Dean was offered food and water, treated not with hostility but with cautious respect. "How many?" he asked Asteria, gesturing to the community. "Nearly 100, she replied, her voice filled with wonder. "From different clans, different regions, all with similar stories, escaped during raids, fled into the thorn fields, eventually found their way here." The elder, whose name was Thorn, approached them again. He spoke to Asteria, who translated for Dean. "He asks if your people will truly come, if help is really on the way. If they receive my message, yes," Dean assured her. "The Galactic Core takes situations like this very seriously, but I can't promise how long it will take." When Asteria translated this, Thorn nodded gravely and spoke again at length. "He says they have waited years for this moment," Asteria relayed. "They can wait a little longer, but in the meantime, they want to help us. The slavers will be searching the cave system. We need to prepare." Over the next hours, Dean was included in the Felshans' war council. Though he couldn't understand their language directly, Asteria translated, and he was impressed by their strategic thinking. They had mapped the entire cave system, knew every entrance and exit, had established surveillance of the slavers' operations. "They've been gathering intelligence for years," Asteria explained, a new respect in her voice, "waiting for the right moment to strike back. And they think this is it?" Dean asked. "Your distress call changes everything," she confirmed. "If help is coming from off-world, the slavers will be trapped between two forces. But the timing must be perfect." The plan that emerged was daring. The Felshans would use their knowledge of the caves to distract and divide the slavers, while Dean and Asteria would return to the crashed ship with a small team. There, they would try to enhance the distress signal and, if possible, access the ship's defensive systems to use against the slavers. "It's risky," Dean acknowledged, "but it could work." That night, as the Felshan community rested and prepared for the coming battle, Dean found himself sitting beside Asteria on a ledge overlooking the underground river. Her wound had been treated, and though she moved stiffly, the healers assured her it would mend cleanly. "I never knew," she said softly, gazing at the community below. "All this time, I thought I was alone, that my people were nearly extinct." "You've been given a second chance," Dean observed. "A future." Asteria turned to him, her luminous eyes searching his face. "And what of your future, Dean Richards? When this is over, when your people come?" "I meant what I said before," he replied. "I want to stay, at least for a while, to help rebuild, to establish proper relations between your people and the Galactic Core." "Only for that reason?" Asteria asked, a new note in her voice, something softer, almost vulnerable. Dean met her gaze steadily. "No, not only for that." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger than any words could express. Finally, Asteria reached out, hesitantly, and placed her hand over his, a gesture that bridged their different worlds. "We should rest," she said eventually. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Dawn, or what passed for dawn in the underground sanctuary, came all too quickly. The Felshan warriors prepared for battle, donning primitive armor made from thorn beast hide and bone. Dean had been given a weapon, a spear similar to Asteria's, but balanced for his height and strength. Thorn addressed the gathered warriors in their language, his voice resonant with authority and purpose. When he finished, the Felshans raised their weapons in a unified gesture of determination. "What did he say?" Dean asked Asteria. "That today, they fight not just for survival, but for their future," she translated. "That with you here, representing the wider galaxy, they have hope for the first time in years." The assault force split into teams, each with its own objective. Dean and Asteria, along with 4 Felshan warriors, would take a direct route back to the crashed ship. Other groups would create diversions, drawing the slavers away from their path. They moved through, The cave system with remarkable speed, the Felshins' knowledge allowing them to avoid the areas where slavers have been spotted. Occasionally, they heard distant sounds of conflict, evidence that the diversion teams were engaging the enemy. As they neared the surface, Asteria pulled Dean aside during a brief rest. "Whatever happens," she said intently, "know that meeting you changed everything. For me, for my people. We're going to succeed," Dean assured her, gripping her shoulder. "Both of us." She nodded, but her eyes held a shadow of doubt, the wariness of someone who had seen too many hopes shattered. "If we get separated, if something happens to me, promise you'll tell your people about us. About what happened here." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Dean insisted. "But yes, I promise." They emerged from the caves into early morning light. The crashed ship loomed ahead, seemingly abandoned. But Dean knew better. The slavers would have left guards, expecting them to return. There, one of the Felshin warriors whispered, pointing to movement near the ship's hull breach. 2 guards. They watched for several minutes, confirming there were only 2 visible sentries. The Felshins communicated with hand signals, formulating a plan of attack. Asteria explained it to Dean with quick gestures. They would circle around and approach from multiple angles, overwhelming the guard before they could raise an alarm. The attack went perfectly. The slavers, overconfident and bored with guard duty, were neutralized quickly and silently. The way into the ship was clear. Inside, they moved cautiously toward engineering, where Dean's transmitter was still functioning. The ship seemed deserted. Most of the slavers had apparently joined the search in the cave system. In engineering, Dean was relieved to find his makeshift transmitter intact. Better yet, a small light on the panel was blinking, indication of a received signal. "Someone heard us," he reported excitedly. "There's a response in the buffer." He played the recorded message. Galactic Core Vessel Athena responding to distress call. ETA, Thornia, orbit approximately 6 hours. Hold position. Assistance incoming. 6 hours, Asteria calculated. "Can we hold the ship that long?" "We'll have to," Dean said. "And we need to create a beacon to guide them to this specific location." While Dean worked on enhancing the signal, Asteria and the Felshin warriors secured the ship, setting up defensive positions at key entry points. They found evidence that the slavers had been using the crashed vessel as a secondary base, supplies, weapons, and most disturbingly, holding cells designed for captives. They were planning a major raid, Asteria observed grimly, examining documents she'd found, coordinating with off-world transport to take captives directly to the slave markets. "Not anymore," Dean promised. "When the Corps arrives, this operation ends for good." Their preparations were interrupted by a sudden alarm from one of the Felshin lookouts. A large group of slavers was returning, at least 20 heavily armed men approaching rapidly from the direction of the caves. They must have realized the cave attacks were a diversion, Asteria concluded. "They're returning to secure their base." "How long until they reach us?" Dean asked, still working on the beacon. "Minutes," one of the warriors replied in broken galactic standard. 5, maybe less." Dean worked frantically, making the final adjustments to the enhanced beacon. "Done," he announced finally. "This will lead the Corps straight to us. Now we just need to hold out until they arrive." The Felshins had already barricaded the main entrances to the ship, using debris and equipment to create defensive positions. Asteria organized them into teams, covering each potential entry point. Dean joined her at the main breach, where they expected the heaviest assault. 5 hours and 40 minutes, he said, checking his chronometer. "That's how long we need to last." Asteria gripped her spear tightly. "Then we last. We have no choice." The first attack came minutes later, a frontal assault on the main breach. The slavers had expected to find the ship undefended and were surprised by the organized resistance. Energy weapons flashed against the barricades as the Felshins returned fire with their own crude but effective projectiles. Dean and Asteria fought side by side, moving between positions to shore up defenses where needed. The first wave was repelled, but not without cost. One of the Felshin warriors was severely wounded, and their barricades were damaged. "They'll try another approach," Dean predicted, helping to reinforce the weakened barrier. probably multiple entry points simultaneously. He was right. The next attack came from 3 directions at once. The main breach, an emergency exit they'd barricaded, and an overhead maintenance hatch they hadn't even known existed. The fighting was intense, hand-to-hand in some places, as slavers managed to breach their defenses. Asteria was everywhere, her speed and ferocity turning the tide at critical moments. Dean found himself in close combat with a slaver who'd broken through, disarming the man and rendering him unconscious with a precise strike taught in core combat training. Hours passed in a blur of attack and defense, brief respites and renewed assaults. The slavers seemed determined to recapture the ship at any cost, perhaps realizing that their entire operation was at risk. Dean checked his chronometer whenever he had a moment. 3 hours passed, then 4, the time crawling by as their defenses wore thin. During the 5th hour, the situation became desperate. Multiple breaches had forced them to abandon the outer sections of the ship, retreating to engineering and the surrounding compartments. They were down to just Dean, Asteria, and 3 Felsian warriors, the others either wounded or killed in the defense. 1 more hour, Dean encouraged them, applying a makeshift bandage to a cut on his arm. Just hold for 1 more hour. They're preparing something, Asteria warned, her acute hearing picking up movements outside their defensive perimeter. Something big. She was right. The next attack included explosive charges that blew a hole in their barricade, allowing a surge of slavers to pour through. The fighting became chaotic, a desperate struggle for survival. Dean found himself separated from Asteria, forced back toward the transmitter he'd been protecting. A slaver broke through, weapon aimed directly at the vital equipment. Without thinking, Dean threw himself into the path of the energy bolt. Pain seared through his shoulder as he collapsed against the console, but he managed to disable his attacker with a kick to the knee. Dean! Asteria's voice cut through the chaos. She appeared beside him, dispatching another slaver with terrifying efficiency. You're hurt. Protect the transmitter, he gasped, struggling to his feet despite the pain. Nothing else matters. The remaining Felsians formed a tight circle around engineering, preparing for what seemed like their last stand. The slavers had them surrounded, cutting off all escape routes. The situation appeared hopeless. Then, a new sound cut through the battle, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from above. The ship trembled slightly, dust raining from the ceiling. What is that? Asteria asked, still braced for attack. Dean's face broke into a pained smile. Engines. Spacecraft engines. They're here. The slavers heard it too, their attack faltering as they realized the implications. Some broke off, rushing toward exits, while others pressed their attack with increased desperation. Hold on, Dean shouted to his companions. Just a few minutes more. The humming grew louder, accompanied by a new sound, the distinctive whine of core shuttlecraft. Bright light suddenly poured through the ship's broken hull as powerful searchlights swept the area. An amplified voice boomed from outside. This is Captain Mercer of the Galactic Core, vessel Athena. Throw down your weapons and surrender immediately. The effect was immediate. Many of the slavers dropped their weapons, recognizing the futility of resistance against core forces. Others tried to flee, only to be captured by the teams, now rapidly deploying around the crashed ship. Dean slumped against the console, exhaustion and pain finally overwhelming him. Asteria caught him before he could fall, supporting his weight with surprising gentleness. You did it, she said softly. Your people came. We did it, Dean corrected, managing a weak smile. Together, core medical teams swarmed into the ship minutes later, treating the wounded and securing the area. Dean insisted that the Felsians be treated first, particularly concerned for Asteria's earlier wound, which had reopened during the fighting. Captain Mercer himself came to engineering, a tall, imposing woman with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of a veteran officer. She surveyed the scene with a professional eye before approaching Dean. Scout Richards, she said, offering a formal salute. Impressive work. Your distress call mentioned indigenous sentience and illegal slaving operations. Yes, Captain, Dean confirmed, wincing as a medic treated his shoulder wound. The Felshans, he gestured to Asteria and the others, have been systematically hunted by slavers for years. There's an entire hidden community of survivors in the cave systems. They helped us hold this position until you arrived. Mercer turned to Asteria, treating her with the same respect she would accord any sentient being. On behalf of the Galactic Corps, I offer our apologies for not discovering this situation sooner, and our commitment to making it right. Asteria straightened, meeting the captain's gaze directly. Words are easy, actions matter more. Indeed they do, Mercer agreed without taking offense. An action you shall have. The slaving operation will be dismantled completely. We'll establish a permanent presence here until the situation is stabilized. As medical teams continued their work and core security units rounded up the remaining slavers, Dean found himself being prepared for transport to the Athena's medical bay. Before they could move him, he reached out, catching Asteria's hand. "Will you come?" he asked, suddenly afraid this would be goodbye. "To the ship, I mean. There's so much to discuss, arrangements to make for your people." Asteria glanced around at the core personnel efficiently securing the area, then back to Dean. For a moment, he saw hesitation in her eyes, the wariness of someone who had learned to trust nothing and no one. "Your people," she began uncertainly. "Will they accept mine?" "Truly, they will," Dean promised. "And if there are problems, I'll be there. Remember? Partners." Something in Asteria's expression softened, and she squeezed his hand gently. "Partners," she agreed. Then, with a hint of the fierceness that had first captivated him, she added, "But if anyone stares at me too long, I'll pounce, and I won't be gentle about it." Dean laughed despite his pain. "I'll warn them, and remind them to watch out for thorns." As they were evacuated to the waiting core shuttle, Dean looked out over the landscape of Thornia, the vast thornfield stretching to the horizon, beautiful and deadly in the evening light. The planet had nearly killed him multiple times, yet somehow he felt a connection to it that he couldn't explain. Beside him, Asteria gazed at the same view, her expression complex, relief, hope, and perhaps a touch of sadness for what had been lost. But when she turned to him, her eyes held something new, possibility. "What happens now?" she asked quietly as the shuttle lifted off. Dean took her hand again, bridging the gap between their worlds. "Now we build something new. Together." The shuttle rose higher, leaving behind the thorns and dangers of the surface, but carrying with it the promise of return, of restoration, of a future neither of them could have imagined when they first met in the shadow of the thorn bushes. Adversaries turned allies, strangers turned partners, survivors turned pioneers of a new beginning. And as Thornia receded beneath them, Dean knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed forever. Not because of his crashed ship or his mission, but because of the fierce, amber-eyed woman beside him who had taught him that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most profound connections.